Hey everyone, just to inform you, this episode was recorded as the WGA were in the middle of negotiations, and we weren't too sure at the time whether or not they'd get a fair deal out of the negotiations or if the AMPTP were just going to blow them off and say, we'll wait, we'll give you guys another month or whatever. As I'm currently editing this episode, however, SAG-AFTRA has stated that they will be meeting with the Alliance Motion Picture and Television Producers for their fair deal starting on October 2nd. We'll keep you up to date on said strike as each episode comes out every 2 weeks. We're being asked by SAG-AFTRA during this time to continue our support for them, whether it be picketing with them in person, providing donations, or simply spreading the message across social media platforms. I should also point out that Stacie, who is our guest for the episode, and you will meet very shortly, also wishes the best for those who are fighting for their future in this industry, along those who were affected by the strikes. Until then, we ask you to hang in there and keep up the good work, guys. You deserve this. Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Lone Screenplay Nominee Podcast, where we talk about films that were solely nominated for an Oscar in the writing categories. I'm your host, Matthew Anderson, and today we have Stacie Jones Gentzler, who is a film producer and production consultant. Welcome to the show, Stacie. How are you today?
Hey, Matt. Thanks so much for having me. It's a beautiful day in Maryland, and happy to be here.
Yeah. Before I go any further with my typical questions I go for the show, for anyone who is not aware of who Stacie is, she is I already mentioned she's a production manager, was a film producer and production consultant, but she's also been in the past a teacher of mine from Stevenson University, and I believe it was a production management course, correct?
Yeah, I think when you were there, it was either production management or the business of filmmaking. I can't remember which one.
Okay. But yeah, no, I figured ever since you talked about in class about this movie, Margin Call, that we'll get into shortly, I figured I got to have you on the show because not only were you, had you, just showed me the movie, and said like, hey, this is a really interesting movie. I think you guys should watch this, not just from a production standpoint, but also from how the film is told in of itself with a small scale story. But you also had worked on it in the past too, if I'm correct in saying that.
Yep. Yeah, I served as the unit production manager, and the film was shot in 2011, in the summer of 2011. So I have a feeling some of the stuff you might ask me today is going to be a far stretch in my memory,
Okay.
but we're going to go for it anyway.
Okay. Yeah. No. That's fine. Yeah. So, like I said, we'll get into Margin Call in a minute, but before we do, I just have some questions to ask in general, in case anyone is aware in our general audience of what exactly is, what do you do for a living? Like what's a production consultant or a film producing role in what you do in particular?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a million different types of producers in film. There's executive producers, there's money producers, there's logistics producers, and, there's all kinds of stuff. I mainly kind of started my career as like a logistics producer. I learned how to, budget and schedule and, put crews together and, source vendors and equipment and things like that. I had I was fortunate enough to meet some really amazing mentors along the way who kind of helped pull me along with them through the process, which, allowed me to do things like work on this movie Margin Call. So I spent most of my career kind of acting as a production manager. So the on-set, role of, like I said, putting the crews together and sourcing vendors and helping with scheduling and budgeting and just the day-to-day kind of flow of a film set. And then as I kind of, got a little bit older and sort of pulled away from being on set all day, every day, because I wanted to just, I guess, sort of, settle down life a little bit and have a family and that sort of thing. I still wanted to use my skills where I could. So again, I was fortunate enough to be asked to be an adjunct instructor at Stevenson. I think it was in like 2017 or 18. So I've been there for about 5 years now. And then I also kind of run like a small business where I do a lot of budgeting and scheduling and pre-production development work for, smaller, low budget independent films.
Nice. Yeah, I'm pretty sure when I was there, well, technically I was there twice actually because I had to drop out the first time for personal reasons, but the second time, yeah, I got to admit, I'm not just saying this just because I have to, and you're my professor, but I honestly have to admit, working at the work, being in your class for Stevenson did make me appreciate a lot of what went into filmmaking in general, not just with budgeting, but also scheduling, getting various vendors. Even just no matter how big or small scale the movie it is, every movie is always hard to make because you got to make sure you get the right people involved to tell the story that you're very passionate about or want to do, and you could muck that up just by scheduling and budgeting alone. You don't want like you
Absolutely.
don't want a movie that'll end up being like $300 million when you could have easily done it for $100 million. Um,
Right.
so yeah.
Absolutely.
The other question I wanted to ask was, I assumed that during your time when you became a production manager and started helping people out with various budgeting on various film, especially smaller scale movies, what exactly is I'd assume you'd always see various movies along the way or in your life, but I wanted to ask, what's your favorite genre of film you've seen?
Definitely disaster movies. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I do love disaster movies though. But no, I tend to trend toward, it's definitely drama, and I think I don't really know how to quite classify the particular genre that I am pulled toward, but for me, it's almost like a very simple, family driven human relation type drama. A lot of movies that are my favorites have like great landscapes that serve in the background. Like I'm a big fan. Um, A River Runs Through It is probably,
Mm.
my top of all time. So I love the movies that simplify and tell, the most basic human stories in a really, really, personal way. Um, and I think maybe just because of my age slash generation, I haven't really gotten on board with, the Marvels and all that kind of thing. But um, not that I discredit that at all, because I think it's some incredible filmmaking, but
Mm.
I just personally tend to trend toward those more simple, Americana type stories.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you in terms of like the Marvel stuff. I used to really like a lot of the Marvel, DC stuff. Like I'm still a big fan of Fast and Furious, as dumb as that franchise is and ridiculously stupid as it is. I do enjoy a really fun, big budget, extravaganza blockbuster, but yeah, I will say that whole Marvel DC superhero stuff, it's definitely it can be a bit poisonous, especially when you give too much in one go. But hopefully, down the road, we can either sort of dilute that a little bit to where we don't get as much. Maybe go. I'm not saying we should exterminate it like the westerns, like we did, to where we hardly get
All right.
a good western every once in a while. But like, I'm just saying we need to pump the brakes on it, especially with this past summer where we got so many films. It, just like just extremely high budgeted. Like I said, it's like there's no reason why Indiana Jones costs like 300 million, or even Fast 10 costs like 340 million. There's no reason at all they should be this expensive, when you could do it at such a
Uh,
lower rate. Um but yeah.
yeah, you could solve world hunger just by not making one of those movies essentially.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm a big fan of Fast and Furious, but that is just ridiculous that the latest one was like 340 and the effects look like that. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
so moving on to our movie discussion. I wanted to, like I said, we're here to discuss Margin Call, which was directed and written by JC Chandor. I think I pronounced him right.
Shandor.
Shandor.
Yep.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
a movie from 2011. This won't be a beat by beat bulletin point presentation like you hear on other channels, but we will be discussing major spoilers for our talk. If you haven't seen the film yet and want to hear our full thoughts on it, watch the film and then come back to talk about it. Also, at the time of recording, and I don't know if it's still going to be here by the time the episode drops, but I discovered that it's on YouTube for free with ads. So if you're able to see it that way, go ahead. Otherwise, best of luck trying to find a copy of it. Um, yeah, but I got lucky with mine. So anyway, so this is Shandor's featured debut as writer and director, and I've done a little bit of research that he did a short film prior to this called Despacito, which came out in 2004. And based on my trivia, so from what I read so far, Stacie, and you know, and at any point, just correct me if I'm wrong. He wrote the script in between job interviews, and the film was partially based on his time working in real estate investments in New York City shortly before the Wall Street crash. Margin Call premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was acquired for distribution through Roadside Attractions and Lionsgate, and opened theatrically on October 21st, 2011. It ended up grossing $19.5 million worldwide on a budget of $3.5 million. And while the film itself didn't get any major awards recognition from the Screen Actors Guild or the Writers Guild of America, for a nomination, and I read the other day that it wasn't even eligible for a Writers Guild nom because it's not in their database. Last time I checked, it did earn JC an Academy Award nomination for original screenplay, and the film itself was given both the First Feature Award and the Robert Altman Ensemble Awards at the Independent Spirit Awards. Since then, he's gone on to make films such as All Is Lost, which was released in 2013 and got nominated for sound editing, a category that is no longer with us anymore. They combined it since then into just sound. A Most Violent Year in 2014 came out, Triple Frontier in 2019. And as of this recording, he does have another film that I believe will be out next year called Kraven the Hunter. Looks like he's taken the Marvel superhero paycheck like other directors have. So, yeah. It happens. So anyway, so
Well deserved,
yeah.
yeah.
And so in terms of the log line for the film itself, it's simple. When an analyst uncovers information that could ruin them all, the key players at an investment firm take extreme measures to control the damage. And it's all done within a 24-hour period. The vibes I got from this was very much like a 12 Angry Men kind of scenario, or
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of another movie on the top of my head that's taken place within like 24 hours, but um yeah. So yeah, like I said, I already mentioned earlier that you'd worked on the movie, and I wanted to ask if it's all right with you. What did you think as the movie? And we'll get to some of the production stories along the way. But I just want to ask, as a movie, what did you think of the film? Because you've probably seen it a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I probably watched it 50 times, but I mean, first and foremost, I feel incredibly lucky to have been given the opportunity to be a part of the film. I was really a nobody essentially. Like I said earlier, I happened to get real lucky and I worked really, really hard for, one person in particular, my mentor, the line producer, Susan Lieber, on a couple films prior to Margin Call, and she was the one that really pushed for me to come on and kind of be her right hand woman on this production. And for that, I feel incredibly grateful. I can remember getting the script because I was actually up in New York shooting something else a couple months before Margin Call started. And I remember she sent me the script for it, and my husband had the opportunity to read it prior to me, and he was actually in the finance world. And I remember he finished the last page and he looked at me and he said, "You have to do this movie." Because it really was one of the most raw. I mean, we talk about, my affinity for that human story, that connection. It was one of the most raw and intimate portraits of the 2008 financial crash and, what happened sort of behind the scenes as it was going down. And I think JC really captured that. And also the movie itself was kind of a miracle project. So.
Yeah, I this is the first time I finally saw it. I know you had kept asking us students to watch the film, whenever we can. I never got around to watching it. I just didn't have the time. And whenever I was like, "Ooh, I think I could watch it," it's like something came along the way, scheduling wise. But I finally saw it for the show. I have to admit, Stacie, I was impressed. I was very, very impressed with the movie. And I think even in class, I think it sort of like joked around and be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, this JC guy, yeah, he doesn't really, oh yeah, there's no way he could impress me, especially with the career that he's had recently." But no, I was actually quite impressed. I was shocked at how good the film was from. Not just from the performances that he directed the hell out of from everyone, Zachary Quinto, Stanley Tucci, who I'm not gonna lie, when I started the movie, it was about 10 minutes in, and maybe it was because I'd already seen that opening like 3 times already, twice from your class, and then this was the third time. I had forgotten that. I was like, oh crap, I'm supposed to take notes. Because how I do the episodes is that I watch the movie and every once in a while I take some notes on my phone. And I was yeah, I just forgot. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I'm supposed to do this for the show. But I was really impressed with all the performances. Everyone did a good job with their roles, and I thought from a screenplay point of view, what impressed me the most about it from a writing standpoint is JC was able to create. There's not there's not a whole lot of external conflicts per se. It's more of a lot of internal. Like it's very much dialogue based, boardrooms. As I said, it's like very much like 12 Angry Men, where it's, a bunch of people are forced to be in this building or in this room in particular, and they have to make the biggest decision they need to make, that could affect, someone's life, or in this case, a whole company, whether or not they're willing to.
And a whole country essentially
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
and I was really engaged with how, very much how JC, like I said, he was able to make it to where you could understand what was going on, what were the stakes internally for everyone. Even Kevin Spacey's character at one point is like, "You cannot be serious in doing this. You realize you do this, we're screwed, right? Nope. Any chance we get of our investors that we've been trying to get for years, we're not getting them back anymore." And
Yep.
I thought all that was interesting. But that was my general thoughts on the movie itself as a whole. While I'm pulling up my notes, was there anything in particular that you wanted to share in terms of like production stories, about your time working on there?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I said before it was kind of a miracle production. Um, and I think one of the coolest things about the project was that we, with the exception of a couple of scenes, we essentially we were all together, cast, A-list cast, crew. I'm talking about 20-year-old production assistants, that sort of thing. We were on one floor of the One Penn Plaza building, which is right above Penn Station in New York. So we had the New York City thing to fight on a daily basis. We had people, we had noise, we had, well, not so much noise up there, but, we had to bring in our trucks every day, and we had to have them bomb sniffed by German Shepherds every morning when we brought them in and out. We were all in one place, and it was a completely naked, bare set when we moved in and rented this one floor for the month for the shoot. So it really had to be production design from the ground up. Everybody had to sort of, quote unquote, live together in this space for 17 straight days. And then on top of that, you add in, getting these A-list cast in and out. I'm sure that the Jeremy Irons story will come up at some
Yes,
point.
we will get to that in a minute. Yeah, we'll get to that soon.
Yeah, and the biggest battle was we're in this all glass building in the middle of July, which is essentially, the end of June, middle of July, the absolute shortest nights of the entire year. So we had about 7 hours of darkness every day,
Wow.
and the entire film takes place at night. So we're in a glass building. So essentially we're just fighting daylight. We're waiting till the sun goes down, and then, fighting as quick as we can before it comes up every day.
The other thing I wanted to ask, because you also mentioned that New York, it only has like 6-7 hours of nighttime. Did you guys, when you were setting up, did you remember any, like, just in general, were there any days where when you guys were setting up, stockbrokers were leaving, or some people were like left behind, they went to do their own business, or was it just like this whole floor is yours for like 6 hours, 7 hours?
Yeah, so we basically moved into a space where a financial company had been, and they gave up their rent, I think like a year prior. So We paid a very large amount of money to essentially just rent a floor of this
Mhm.
building for an entire month. So, would we run into newer professionals? Yes, we would, I guess, in elevators and things like that coming in and out,
Okay.
but nobody specifically on our floor. Yeah, we own that whole floor.
Nice. Yeah, because that's the other thing I didn't even realize while watching the movie. I'm like yeah, yeah. If you guys have to set up at like, let's say hypothetically like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I assume there must be a couple of stockbrokers who are still hanging around doing their stuff on just. But then I realized, yeah, you just bought out the entire floor, so
Yeah, yeah, we did that, and and truthfully, we were coming in at 4 5 p.m. So that we could be ready to hit record when the sun went down. When that was 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever that was at night. So
gotcha. Actually, I might as well bring it up right now. Jeremy Irons, as a whole, like what happened
yeah,
with that? Because I'm trying to find a way to transition into that. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go right
yeah.
into it because I got to know.
So I think what happened was this movie. I think what happened was is that JC sat on this film for a couple years. I think they were, I think they got into the early stages of development once. They had a little bit of money, and forgive me because I don't know the exact story. This
Mhm.
was kind of, rumors and things I heard around the production office. And then all of a sudden they get um, Zach Quinto on board because he was best friends with two of the other producers. They all went to college together, who were then friends with JC. So that's how that connection was made. Zach gets Kevin Spacey on board, and this was pre Kevin Spacey,
Yeah,
trouble
yeah.
stuff. And then Kevin then gets on, once Kevin Spacey was signed on, it was like everybody started kind of coming out of the woodwork from what I understand. So that was how they got a lot of those other A-list names to come on, things like that. And I believe that Sir Ben Kingsley initially was in discussions to have that role, that John Told role.
Hmm.
And something came up, and this happened for a few of the characters actually in the project, but he was one of the bigger names. Something came up where he could no longer do it, so it was kind of a mad scramble. And Jeremy Irons, who's I can't imagine the movie with anybody else but him in that role. He gets on board, but I think as it turns out, his visa was expired or had expired right before he was supposed to fly over and shoot. So it was this mad scramble of, like, I don't know, senators and, people at embassies and all this kind of stuff. And they rushed Jeremy Irons a visa. He comes over, and I think he was initially supposed to film with us for like 5 days or 6 days or something. And that had to get cut down to, I think it was like 2 or 3 days.
Oh wow.
So it was pretty incredible that he got here. But the one thing I will say about him is like, yes, there was lots of rehearsal because he came in and had to do so much in such a little amount of time. But man, Jeremy Irons was born ready. Like he commands a room. He walks in. He knows his lines. I'm sure he learned them on the plane on the way over,
Mhm.
because it was such a last minute thing. And he just absolutely, I think he's probably my favorite performance in the film. But he just, he blows it away.
Yeah, he's really good. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he did some theater work too in his time. Okay,
Yeah, for sure.
so that would explain a lot as to like why he's so good at like memorizing the material, and as you said, probably read the material on the plane ride over.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, he was really good because there were some lines that he said that I was like, this is good. And it's not just showcasing JC as a really talented writer, it's showcasing Jeremy Irons as a great actor in of himself, especially with the the line that's I think even tagged on in the movie itself. There are only three ways to sort of survive in this competition: be first, be smarter, or
Be
cheat.
smarter or
Yeah,
cheat.
and that it's
And we don't cheat.
yeah, and we don't cheat. Yeah, and I thought that was a really good line. There was another great moment, if you don't mind me jumping around with the movie a bit. Towards the end of the
Please.
movie, where it's was it Kevin Spacey's character, wants to tell Jeremy Irons, "I'm out. I don't want to do anymore. Just give me my bonus. I want to go." And he talked about how I need you to stay around for 24 months, longer, so that way, you'll be able to get through, you'll be able to get your money and so on. And they were talking about digging the holes, and I thought the line that Kevin Spacey said about, I can't remember the exact line it was, but it was along the lines of like, you're not going to even notice that the hole was even dug up to begin with, or something like that. But I really love that line, just again the way that some of the dialogue is written, and it didn't feel like it never felt like JC was trying to be like Aaron Sorkin light, because a lot of other writers and directors
Yes.
typically do the whole got to make it snappy, got to make it, look at this fancy writing I got here. And funny enough,
Hmm.
the only filmmaker I could think of recently kind of who kind of got away with that a little bit enough for me was Christopher Nolan when he did Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if you saw that movie.
I
Um,
haven't seen it yet. No, and I'm dying
yeah,
to.
there's moments in there when I had a couple guests on prior to on the show before, Joey Magnuson from Awards Radar. I think he or someone else had said along the way that like this very much feels like an Aaron Sorkin script in the best ways. And watching Oppenheimer, I'm like, yeah, he's actually taking a lot of what Aaron Sorkin does really well, but he's not doing like like a poor man's imitation of him. And in no way was JC ever doing a poor man's imitation of Aaron Sorkin. But he was
Yep.
combating with like, getting across the information that your characters need to give in a way that feels realistic enough. And
Very real.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I was really impressed by what JC had done again as a writer in of itself, because again, it's always tough to do these kind of movies and to grab it and to have your audience gripped and engaged without having much external problems going on. Because it's so
Yep.
easy to lose an audience that way, and it's probably part of the reason why we keep getting a lot of like action movies where it's like we got to have a lot of
Hmm.
external conflicts, because the internal stuff it's a lot harder to do, and you need to sit down and actually think about your characters and your story and how everything is going to come through. But but yeah, no, I thought what he did was great with the script. There are a couple other performances in the film, like you said. Again, and Jeremy Irons I think is probably the best of the bunch. But I just want to separate the art from the artist from anyone out there. Kevin Spacey was pretty good in this. He did a really good job in his performance. And as you said, was probably like the main linchpin as to why this production even got started to begin with. I also want to bring up Zachary Quinto, which I hadn't seen a whole lot of him to begin with outside of the Star Trek movies, which he's good in them, but it really does showcase his acting chops for sure.
Yeah.
And I was also impressed with Paul Bettany. He's really good in the movie too. It's for again another actor from the Marvel Cinematic Universe playing Vision and Jarvis. It was really cool to see him showcase his acting chops too. And I cannot remember for the life of me who the other guy was. He was like the
Simon Baker, I think you're probably thinking of.
he was good.
Simon
He was
Baker.
good. Penn
Yeah.
Badgley.
Oh yeah, Penn Badgley. And he's actually taken off the past couple years. Well, he was on Gossip Girl at the time, and
Oh
that
yeah.
that blew up. But the past couple years, I think it just got canceled. The Netflix series You,
I
YOUU. Yeah,
yeah, I could be mistaken, but
I
I
think
think they're doing another part
right.
for that.
They might be. They might be.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it. I haven't followed too closely, but yeah, everyone you mentioned, this movie needed a lot to come together. It was the acting chops, it was the script, it was so much the crew, and everyone just kind of working as one unit. Like I said, the space we were in was so small and contained that we had to essentially live with each other for 3 weeks. And all the people you talked about, not only great actors, but really decent human beings too, which is, Penn Badgley, amazing. Um, Paul Bettany, incredibly just salt of the earth, nice guy. So everybody who was there, they just, wasn't like making a big Hollywood movie. It really had that independent feel, which was great. And I think that was part of its magic too.
Mhm.
And again, we talk about JC and his writing capabilities, and this was definitely very much, he's so talented, but this was a lightning in a bottle scenario. It's like he wrote this movie and he had these connections, and it all just came together in this like incredibly beautiful way, I think.
Yeah. The other aspect I wanted to bring up, I thought was really helped the film a lot, was that in the best way. And usually whenever you hear people say this, it's like, oh, you're very critical towards the movie. I like that the film, like the story is self-contained so much to where you could realistically do it as a play if you wanted to. But it's still like, it still works though. Like there's enough energy and there's enough dynamic between everyone to where it's like, even by the end, when Kevin Spacey's character is being told by Jeremy Irons, like you're either with us or you're not. And even the Simon Baker character told Paul Bettany, if Kevin, his character, if he falls out and he doesn't want to do it, are you willing to do it? And he goes, and he essentially says, if you get me, you're probably getting the same Kevin, in terms of like the industry, because he talked about, we have the same morality capabilities in terms of like what's right and what's wrong and such. So that was interesting. And also too, Stanley Tucci did a good job in the movie too, and he's one when the film started. I don't know why, but whenever I hear my grandmother talk about, confusing actors' faces for, like, oh yeah, that Mark Wahlberg guy, he looks like, he reminds me of DiCaprio, or was DiCaprio in that or whatever, or Matt Damon. And I thought it was interesting that when the film started, I'm like, is this Stanley Tucci or is this, there was another actor he confused me with. I think it was, Mark Strong, I think it was. I was like, wait, Mark Strong's in this? But I realized, no, it's Stanley Tucci. But no, he was really good. And he, as you said, whenever you cast a movie like this, you want to make sure your actors are doing it good enough. You want to make sure you cast the right roles in terms of their dialogue performances. But even when, this is definitely a film that I'm going to remember that, it's not only important that you cast the actor who, like acting wise, I should say overall, the dialogue is just as important for the actor as it is when they don't have to talk and speak in said scenes. Because when you get to the boardroom scene, and Paul Bettany, I read somewhere that in those, boardroom scenes, he hardly talks at all. And, I'm just watching the way that he interact, like even during the boardroom scene with Jeremy Irons, I'm like, he's not speaking a whole lot in the scene, and he's doing a good job
Yeah.
conveying the emotions through, visually through what's going on facially through his expressions of said moment. And that's definitely something I think a lot of directors need to consider too, is that you want to make sure your actor isn't giving just a blank slate of a performance when they're supposed to be like really involved in said scene in some way, because
Yeah.
and it happens all the times where it's like, oh, okay, that actor kind of flubbed those scenes when he's not talking because he's not given much direction. um but I was impressed by that. And there were the other thing I wanted to mention too was when we got to the scene where it was revealed that by the end that Stanley Tucci is alive, and that his wife had called Paul Bettany. I for sure thought for a second when Paul Bettany said on the phone, "Oh, don't worry, we'll be discreet about it." I thought, oh, he committed suicide, because obviously when the crash happened, I know there was a handful of people who took their own lives, tragically, unfortunately. And I thought this would have been a case of like, okay, yeah, Stanley Tucci he just got so pissed off and depressed to where he just took his own life. But no, it's revealed by the end he's actually alive. And yeah, that was also a really good scene between him and Paul Bettany at the end. And
Yeah.
and
The bridge
yeah,
scene.
the bridge scene. And I also like too
Yeah.
how he's come to think of it, JC Chandor does a good amount of setup and payoffs in terms of like setting up said scenes. Like, we set up the Demi Moore and Stanley Tucci relationship at the beginning, and then they talk at the end. And same thing with Paul Bettany too. I thought some of that was really interesting. And it was just like I said, just a really well crafted film. And there's and the other thing I have to commend you for, or at least commend the crew as a whole, the crew, including you, Stacie, is when you guys shot those club scenes, the was it the stripper clubs and the bar scenes.
Hmm.
The one thing I was glad that you guys did was, even though it was a very, I don't know what it was like on those days when you filmed those scenes, but I'm glad that you guys were able to keep it sort of in like close proximity, use a lot of close-ups to sort of hide, and because I assume it was probably like a smaller budgeted movie, you guys couldn't use like a whole bar or have like a ton of extras involved. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in fact, one of the locations, I believe the stripper bar, if I'm remembering correctly. So, in order to get the New York State tax incentive, in those days, you had to shoot on a qualified soundstage
Okay.
for at least a day of your production or a certain percentage of your production. And I apologize if you're hearing lawnmowers going on right now. Let me know if it gets too bad. I'm happy to walk away.
Okay.
the reality of podcasting, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that bar was actually built by the art department.
Okay.
And that's probably another reason, yeah, why you don't see too many people and too many things, is because we did shoot that on a soundstage, I believe in Queens, and so that all was built from scratch.
Okay. Yeah, because I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, a lot of, like, it seemed like whoever's idea it was to sort of film it with a lot of, like, close-ups and be very, like, show very minimum of the area, to that way it doesn't showcase, because we've already established through, like, the loud music and through the people with drinks, it's like, okay, they're at a bar, and whenever you do a production like this, not just talking with you about the movie in the past, but also just in general from what I've seen of other films, it's best that you try to hide a little bit of that, so like limitations, and use that to your advantage a bit, to where it's like we don't need to spend like we don't need to spend like a wide shot of the whole bar when it's like it's not even set up for the
Yeah,
whole thing. So
yeah, and all we want to do is really just keep the central focus on the characters and that part of the dialogue.
yeah,
So,
yeah, no, I was glad you guys did that, because that was the one thing I was like, I'm so glad that you guys did that, because a lot of other directors kind of are like, okay, let's show a bit more
yeah,
than that.
and yeah, just revisiting, Stanley Tucci a little
Yeah,
bit. He flew in, and I think he was our first and second day. He was only in for 2 days, maybe 3 days of the shoot.
really.
So yeah, so he was on. I remember we did our day one of filming was in Brooklyn Heights, 5 a.m. We were out there getting set up, and that was the very first scene we shot in the whole movie. And coming up from smaller independent films and things like that, and this being a very small set. I remember walking over to the craft services table, and Stanley Tucci was standing there putting cream cheese on a bagel next to me, and it was definitely a very surreal moment. And I had a few of those throughout the shoot for sure, but
Oh yeah,
I don't want to say I get starstruck, but definitely it was really interesting. There was a few times like that where I was washing my hands in the bathroom next to Demi Moore, or
yeah.
whatever, and it's just like you're just like, wait, really? How did I get here?
Yeah,
So
yeah, especially with that happened to me a couple times. Once with the I saw John Waters at it was I think it was in Baltimore. They were doing like, this was back in like 2019, like right before the pandemic started, and he was giving an honorary award to a production designer of his at the time. And I remembered I volunteered to sort of be like a what do you call it, like a chaperone, I guess, or like someone who's in charge of helping out with the area and setting stuff up. And it was kind of surreal to know at the last minute of like, oh yeah, by the way, John Waters might be here. And I go, really? And I had never seen any of his movies. I had seen him from the documentary This Film Is Not Yet Rated. And it was really just like really bizarre to be like, wow, I'm actually standing in the same room with him. And the only thing I did when we walked by was I just sort of, kept my mouth shut, just did like a little head nod and a smile. And I think he did the same thing for me too. And then after that, it was almost like a wave of air just came right past me. Like, holy shit, wow, that happened. Holy shit.
yeah, yeah.
So that was, yeah. So yeah, like I said,
It's fun. You gotta geek out every once in a while. Otherwise, why are we in this
I'm
business?
sorry, what was that?
I said you gotta geek out every once in a while. Otherwise, why are we in this business?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I was, yeah. I'm looking through my notes to see if there's anything else. There were two other notes I wanted to bring up that I thought were really, actually, yeah, I'll bring up a couple more notes regarding with the movie itself. One, when Paul Bettany's on the phone and he's talking to Kevin Spacey, and Kevin Spacey's, is driving home, is trying to drive home, and it's like, it's 11 o'clock. It's like, why don't you send me this information in an email? And I love the inflection that Paul Bettany gave of like, I don't think that's a good idea. And I just love that, like, a simple line like that is just delivered like you get the
Yep.
point of the importance for this moment. And so I thought that was great. The other thing,
Yeah, I
go
think.
ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think there's so many of those, and I know we're essentially talking about JC's writing in this, and I think you're right. Like the way it comes together is, the writing is, if nothing else, it's so tight, and then he brings these actors on who can really nail these simple little one-liners that bring the emotion of what we're doing. They really bring it home. Going back to like Tucci, and standing in the boardroom and turning around to everyone and saying, "So that we may survive." That's one of the most impactful things. Even the speech that Bettany gives up on the roof about where his money gets
Yeah.
spent and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just these little nuggets, these little Easter eggs throughout the film, that are just, I think, incredible for somebody who wrote a script in 4 days, essentially.
I'm glad you brought up the rooftop scene because I remembered you had said in class that that all the actors had to be wired in order to make sure that it was a safe production.
Yeah, that was like one of the craziest days. So, a little bit of movie magic in that one. There was two different places that scene was shot. So, the main sort of dialogue back and forth where the helipad comes over and they're standing next to a door. I think they're all smoking a cigarette. The three of them. That was shot on the roof of 110 Plaza, and it was the top of an elevator shaft. So where that came out, there was a couple small stairs and a railing, and it was surrounded by the rest of the roof. It was essentially in the middle of the roof, so there was no danger anywhere. It was 4 feet off the ground or something like that. And then as Paul Bettany's telling his story and he's sort of hanging off, the edge of the side of the building, that was probably one of my scariest days just as a production manager because everyone's responsible for a film, but I think as the PM, you feel very responsible for what goes on because a lot of like final safety decisions kind of come down to you and the first AD and things like that. So that was one of those ones where we had Manny Silviero, old school, stunt guy from New York, incredibly safe. He had Bettany, just harnessed up, and he was holding onto him underneath by holding onto his feet just out of camera frame. And I think in that night, if I'm remembering correctly, we also had a giant jib arm that went out over the balcony of the building. And, I think one of the biggest fears was that the camera head might just fall off of that and fall 52 floors down or whatever the heck it was. So I remember there being a lot of stress and a lot of tension that night. So, but I think it came out beautifully on camera. Everybody was certainly safe. Everything was done the right way, but it's still a nail biter the whole way through as you're doing it.
Yeah, that was definitely one where I was even rewatching as I have what do you call it? I think it was like vertigo, where I just cannot do high heights. I cannot do it. So long as I'm able to sort of go quickly, maybe, but like I cannot stay on like a building and be asked to look down because I'm like, oh Jesus, this is too much. um, but yeah, no, I thought that was like a really like great moment to show like these characters, it's there's a bit of levity through some of the film too. Like there's some moments where the film has to be a little bit like because it is a very stressful scenario, and obviously a lot of lives are going to be at risk because of the decision making. But that was definitely a moment for me where I was like, okay, yeah, that was I was able to connect a bit with the characters because they talk about how you could probably pawn off these like hookers, booze and as like entertainment for your
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
So I thought that was good.
76,800 and yeah,
Yeah.
booze, gambling, and hookers or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, having that little bit of comic relief was good because not just the intensity of the film itself, but also talking about that finance stuff and doing it with such accuracy, I think can be monotonous for the viewer sometimes. And I think JC did a good job of breaking that up, and then also getting the information across while not making it completely boring to the viewer.
Yeah. And I also read somewhere too on IMDb as well that there was originally a deleted scene that had Simon Baker making a call to Jeremy Irons saying that this situation was happening. And I like that in the movie. It's like you don't need to explain it. It's like, excuse me, I need to step out of the room for a minute. And he comes back in and he tells him, already made the call. And I thought that was a really great way of JC telling us, don't make it dumb for the audience. The audience will catch on. And I thought like he did a good job with that. And I don't know how much you could talk about this or if you could talk about it at all. But apparently I had also found out that they had hired someone, I think it was like Meryl Streep's daughter, I think, to play the ex-girlfriend for Zachary Quinto.
Yeah, there was a couple scenes like that were deleted, and that was one of them. I distinctly remember us shooting It was kind of a big deal because, you know, we had to get the whole crew out of the building, out onto the streets for half a day or whatever it was. So it was really a big chunk. You know, when you only have 17 days to get it done, that was a really big chunk of the project, essentially, of the production, where we had to get everybody out. I think the scene took place at, I want to say, like Hot Dog Cart or something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, it was great. It was Grace Gummer. It was Meryl Streep's daughter. And there was a whole scene there, and it did ultimately get, you know, it did get cut out of the film. I think the way that they put it was, you know, for poor directing work. But I don't remember ever hearing anything specific on set about, you know, how it went and that sort of thing. Because obviously I was just kind of more focused on the logistics and things like that because, yeah, there was a lot of logistics for 17 days.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially with a movie like this or any movie in general, you just have to be like laser focused on getting the shots that you need and getting everything that you need done, and make sure you don't go over budget, and just, you know, whatever kind of problems that come up, okay, just try to deal with them as quickly as you can and move on.
Yeah, it was a lot of putting out fires. I mean, I can remember them needing something very specific for a shot. And obviously we were filming overnight, so it's really hard to get any vendors to, you know, we couldn't get anything because anything we needed, we had to get during the day. So, so essentially the production team was working both day and night because we had to be awake and operating during business hours to help do, you know, to help get equipment that we needed or gear or things like that. And then we were also on set for the overnight filming. And I don't remember what piece of equipment it was, but I remember it was something that ultimately we finally got a hold of it. We finally got it delivered to the building, and it was too big to fit in an elevator.
God.
And it needed to go up to the 52nd floor. So we ended up having to call, like, I don't know, like building emergency in the middle of the night. And like maintenance had to come in at 3 a.m, and they had to like take off the roof piece for the, what do you call it, the service elevator, just so they could get that piece up there. And like, I don't know what happened. Probably ultimately they didn't even end up using that piece of equipment. I would love to bet, but you know, it was that kind of stuff just all day, every day. So, and at the time I slept very little, and but looking back on it, you know, it was a blast, and it was great it was a great project to be a part of. So
awesome. Yeah, but that's Hollywood for you. You know, you like you gotta need this. You gotta need this, and on the day I'll be like, yeah, we can't do it either because we don't want it or we don't need it, or we can't
those
have
stories
it.
are a dime a dozen.
Yeah,
exactly.
One of the final notes I'll bring up, and then we'll get into the some of the awards stuff. The one shot I was even today, because I watched the movie the other night, and the one shot that kind of impacted me a little bit, I was like, oh, I didn't expect that to get any kind of like feeling out of it, was it was when Penn Badgley he was in the bathroom and he was crying, you know, on the toilet seat. And that was a moment where, you know, the other thing that worked about that moment for me, I guess, or what stood out for me, was not just showing the average person who lost their job at the firms like this during the financial crash, but also, it was nice that JC was able to sort of, you know, show this character throughout being kind of a prick and making these like snide comments of like, oh yeah, whatever, it's not going to happen to us. And he's making all these questions like, you know, you want to guess how much someone made, so and so made? Yeah, it was like 10 million or something. You know, it's just like all the like trying to make conversation when he doesn't really need to. And I guess that was sort of his like coping mechanism of like trying to tell himself like everything's going to be okay, and that's why he's sort of acting like a little kid. And then that moment came when he's like, yeah, there's a good chance I'm going to get fired and lose my job and never work here again. That was definitely a moment where I was like, holy shit, that was kind of impactful. And it was a little bit,
great character building.
yeah, and it was also really shocking too, a little bit shocking that okay, though I guess I shouldn't be surprised when they promoted Zachary Quinto's character from like after he was the one that sort of finished the job, and he's like, okay, I finished the job, and I, you know, sort of, you know, help the investors, like, hey, here's the warning, we need to do this, we need to do something now. And that was interesting in of itself. But but like I said before, we get through the award section of the show, were there any other stories or things you wanted to say about the movie itself, or anything behind the scenes stuff that you would like to share that we haven't talked about already?
No, I mean, I think I've mentioned already just, what an incredibly great cast and crew it was, and just how cool everybody was. And, I just think the industry itself is such a small industry. It's always interesting to me. And this is just a little aside, but um, it's funny. I grew up in a really small town in New Jersey, and my parents always, for as many years as I can remember, when we used to shop in our little town, they would always go into this jewelry store,
Hmm.
and we always knew Pam and Dan from the jewelry store in this little town. And it turns out that, fast forward 20 something, whatever, 30 years later, I happened to catch Pam and Dan when I was visiting my parents at home, for a long weekend. And it turns out that they are the aunt and uncle of JC Shandor.
Oh,
So literally, my parents were friends with his aunt and uncle my entire life growing up, and I never knew this and I ended up working with him on a movie, you know,
nice.
not connected at all, and figuring that out. So it always just blows me away how you can find these tiny little connections in such a big industry. But I just thought that was really cool. But yeah, no, I mean, the movie itself, just like I said, I was so happy to be a part of it. I think it was such an incredible film, and it was just a miracle that everybody got it done in such a short amount of time. Every single person worked their butts off.
Yeah, and you could definitely tell with the film like this that you guys did a really damn good job making sure you were able to get everything done on the day of. And I had also read somewhere that when Jeremy Irons, during his boardroom speech, there's a shot you could see in the final cut where you could barely see the sun come up, like just barely. And I'm like, wow, okay, they really worked their asses off on this, and it definitely shows. But yeah, as for like I said, really glad you guys worked on it. It worked pretty well, and I was really, like I said, I was really surprised for a movie that's all about a lot of talks in boardrooms and talking about stock, like the market value and such. It was interesting that I was able to get invested enough and, well, no pun intended, invested. Haha. Um, the I was just really impressed with the whole movie. I think it definitely showcased, obviously, all the actors here who were doing a damn good job. Even, as you said, Demi Moore. I think it was Asif Mambi. I think was another one who
Hmm.
I keep forgetting was in the movie. And the unfortunate thing about him is the only thing I could always picture him in for movies is that shitty Last Airbender movie that he was in. Unfortunately, he probably got a
Yeah.
pretty good paycheck out of it, but as a huge fan of that show, I was not a fan of it at all. But
Yeah, he's been in a lot of, he was in The Proposal, and he's one of those guys where you recognize his face, and he's a great actor. He ended up, um, I think, being a great part of that
oh
movie
yeah,
for the small part that he has.
yeah, and I can't remember who the hell said this, but the every cast is important, no matter how big or small the role is. and
Truth.
and that's something that is definitely applied here to this cast, because even in JC said in the interviews, it's like this movie lives and breathes on the cast. Like, they're the reason why the film works as much as it did. Um and I'm really glad that it worked out to your guys' favor, and it was just a really solid movie as a whole. As far as the awards chances, it's because usually on the show we talk about in terms of, like, would we have nominated the film for any other categories, and or why did it only get a lone screenplay nomination? I don't know how much you could say about it on the movie itself, but I think really the only explanation I can give as to why the film only got the lone screenplay nod, it was just such a small film in of
Yeah.
itself, and it went up against, it was like a Separation, Bridesmaids, which was like a big comedic hit that year.
Yep.
The Artist, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, and obviously the Woody Allen film Midnight in Paris. Um,
Yeah, which is what he lost the writing
yeah,
award to. Yep.
and yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. I mean, it's always interesting to me, and you bring up the fact that it was a small film, and of course, I could talk till I'm blue in the face because I worked on the film, and of course, I love it, and I wanted it to win everything, and but I find it interesting, and I think that's a huge part of it is the backing you can get, the press, who you can get behind the film, where it can where the releases are, how big that is, because if you look just think 4 years later, The Big Short, essentially the same, the same theme, the same,
Yeah.
film, the same types of characters as far as, the level of the cast and things like that. And I think that won Best Picture, didn't it?
It won.
Or it was
It was
nominated.
nominated for Best Picture, and it won Adapted Screenplay.
Okay, so there you go,
Yeah.
So why that film, yes, and not, Margin Call, who's to say, time, place, what they're up against, all that kind of stuff. But I think if you pick apart Margin Call and you look at what was done for what we had, I mean, I would put this movie up against anything.
Yeah, and like I said, it's nothing. Like the other thing too about when I talk about these awards things, I don't I don't immediately I don't really put any blame of like, oh yeah, no, you guys should have had a better publicist, and so I should have gotten in for more categories. It's just really just because it just happened that way. Some of these cases are what they are. Like last week,
Yep.
or last episode I did was a movie on Casanova 70, which was back in 1965. And I just didn't have much of an explanation as to why it just only got the one screenplay nod, or couldn't get more. It just happens the way it is. Even with this last Oscar season, I'm not sure if you paid much attention, but Danielle Deadweiler was predicted by many, including me, that she was going to get in for Till. And it just, and MGM also didn't even get in for Women Talking for any of the acting categories. We'll see how they do this year with their awards, because I think they have a couple of films like American Fiction and Saltburn is another one. But it just happens, like with these films missing these categories or only getting like a lone screenplay nomination.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and I know there was there was the the hubbub of the scandal with
Andrew
the
Riseborough.
actress from Dear Leslie.
Yep.
But for those people who watched that film, I mean, that was an incredible movie. She was incredible. So, I think, yes, it has a lot to do with a lot of factors.
Yeah. But either way, lone screenplay nomination, that's good.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I can always say I worked on an Oscar-nominated film,
Yeah. I would love to see what was. Do you actually do you have any idea if JC went to the Oscars itself, or he was like, nah, I'm not going?
He did.
Oh, he did. Nice.
Yeah, no, he did. He went. I think he brought his wife, and then one of our lead producers, I think at the last minute, Neil Dodson, he got a ticket too, and he sat way up, I think, in the in the rafters, basically.
Nice. Yeah, because that was I'll try to make this brief, but that was definitely an interesting year for the Oscars, because I think everyone at the time, in another category, I think everyone at the time thought something like The Descendants or Artist or Moneyball was going to win Best Editing, and then out of the blue, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo deservedly got its editing Oscar. And I think
which was incredible. Yeah,
even Angus Wall and Kirk Baxter were like, we were not expecting this at all. And that would have been great. I still love the little line that Meryl Streep gave when she got her award. She was like, when I heard my name called, I could hear half of America go, "Oh, come on, why her again?"
Yeah, I'm just like refreshing myself on that year too. Yeah, that Moneyball was that year. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Yeah, which
was that year.
I surprisingly liked. I was not, because I went into that with very low expectations. I think I saw it during the pandemic year when I was forced to be at school, be homeschooled, so to speak. But I was quite impressed how much I was engaged with Tinker Tailor for another movie that is very much a slow burn, and there's not a whole lot of external conflict going on. Yeah, there's a couple movies from that year I need to rewatch, but I could tell you,
Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was that year.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine, I won't say who it is, but he said it was one of his favorite films of that year. And he loved the movie a lot, because I know a lot of people are not a fan of that film at all. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll
and the Help won Best Picture that year. Of course.
It was The Artist, actually.
Right. Was it?
The Help only won.
It got nominated. Yeah. I see. Yeah. That's right.
I can tell you this though, real quick, to be on the since we're on that topic already. I did rewatch Hugo like a month or a couple months ago. I love Martin Scorsese. I think he's a genius, and I think he's one of my favorite directors of all time. That is one of the few films I do not like.
Yeah.
There's a lot about it to admire, but that's a whole other discussion I can have. But I'm not the biggest fan of it as a whole. But if people like the movie, great. I know that Moneyball was a movie that everyone loved and would have rather have seen win adapted screenplay, but I'm like, it's fine. So
See, isn't that funny? And I think Moneyball falls into that category of, some of my favorite types of films. So
yeah, no, it
I
happens.
loved it.
Different tastes
Yeah.
for different people.
Yep.
But yeah.
That's awesome.
So yeah, like I said, I want to say thank you, Stacie, for dedicating your time to be here on the show. Before we sign off, is there anything you'd like to plug in or where our listeners can follow you along?
Yeah, absolutely. You can catch me on Instagram at Your Film on Fire. And I just want to say thank you to you, Matt, because you were my student, and I really appreciate you inviting me on here now as a peer. And I wish you great things, and I can't wait to see what this podcast does. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to future episodes.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I'll try to deliver as many as I can by the end of the year. There's a couple episodes this year. I don't want to spoil said movies on air, but all I will say is that there's a one or two in particular that involve certain directors that have award contenders out coming this year. So keep an eye on
Okay.
that for all of our
All
listeners.
right.
So as for me, you can follow me along and the show through Linktree under @Matthew995, where you can follow along on all my social media accounts such as Twitter and Letterboxd. On the same site, I've also provided a link where you could listen along to more episodes of the show. If you're interested in being in the hot seat like Stacie has today, let me know, and hopefully we could arrange that happening soon. In the meantime, we hope you guys enjoyed listening to this episode, and we hope to see you at the movies. Take care, guys.